And so the next talk is something, I mean, we have been talking about how working in 3D is important and it's allowing people and teams to communicate in a better way. And part of enabling that communication is giving detail to the creations that we have going on in the different projects that we're working on. And for this, we invited Justin Patton, creative director at Adobe, to walk us through how Adobe Substance 3D is having kind of like a powerful impact in the footwear design industry. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, I guess we're ready to go. Cool. So I'm going to show you guys how to take your designs from Gravity Sketch and use them in Substance 3D Painter for applying materials and other effects. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And it's pre-recorded, so I'll see if I can watch the chat. And then after it's done, we can answer any questions that you have. Okay. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to want to do if you want to add materials to one of your designs in Adobe Substance 3D Painter is export it into a format that Painter understands. And you can do that here in Gravity Sketch by going to Export. Make sure you use either FBX or OBJ, using FBX here. Use a unit that is appropriate. I'm going to go to this Advanced Options, make sure geotype is Mesh. I select welded for the normals, and just render seems to work here for the sub-D mesh. And then I'm saving locally, so I'll have it immediately available to me. And then I'm just going to go back, hit the checkbox, give it a name, and go ahead and export. And there's my path, and I'm ready to go. Can jump to Painter. Okay, now that we have our model exported from Gravity Sketch, here in Substance Painter, I can go ahead and do File New. And I'm going to use the standard ASM template. And where it says File, that's where I'm going to select our FBX that we exported. I can change these after the fact, but I generally will set this to at least 2K and OpenGL. And down under these settings here, I want to enable Auto Unwrap, so we're going to generate UVs for our model. And under the options, I want to make sure this is set to recompute all, and that's going to force it to create new UVs for the whole model. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And the amount of time this will take will depend on how complex the model is. So now I have our shoe here in the viewport. You can see I can orbit it around it using Alt and the 3 mouse buttons, similar to other 3D programs. And looking at the UI, it's going to be comparable to Photoshop in a lot of ways. If I look over here on the left, that's where I'm going to see kind of my tool palette. Right next to it is going to be an asset panel full of materials here that we're going to be able to use directly on the model. The viewport, as I said before, over here is going to be the texture set list, which is going to correlate with the various pieces of the model. The layer stack, where we're going to interact with the materials that we apply, and the properties panel that's going to be relative to whatever we have selected. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the asset panel to get started. And I can go ahead and just grab a material from the asset panel. And if I drag it over the model, I'm going to see that it highlights the various regions. And if I let go, it's going to go ahead and apply it to that region. And so I dropped it onto this upper section, and I can see both in the layer stack and here in the texture set, as I mentioned, correlates to that piece. And then the layer stack is going to correlate to that texture set. And so here I have that material. I can check its visibility. With it selected, I can look at its properties. So going down into the properties, I'm going to see the options at the top is going to be relative to the way that the material and the textures are applied via the UVs. And so these are going to be common among all materials. And so if I do something like scale, I can scale how many times this is tiled, rotate, I can rotate that texture, offset, etc. Below that is going to be attributes relative to the material. And so in this case, I applied a procedural material. And whenever I say procedural, I'm generally going to be talking about something that was authored in Substance Designer. And when things are authored there, generally they will have some kind of attributes exposed that are going to give you some higher level of control. So, of course, I have a color attribute that's going to allow me to change the color of that material, as well as a few other variations in terms of how rough the surface and how metallic that surface is. And it's important to understand when it comes to materials that it's going to be very important to take the lighting into consideration to visualize all its effects. And so what I can do here in the viewport is hold shift and right click, and I'll be able to rotate the lighting environment. And that may help me understand exactly what's going on with the surface. So the look of this specific material is being controlled mostly by the parameters that have been exposed. So let's look at a basic material to get a sense of what the individual components do. So I'm just going to turn the visibility off of that layer, and I can just create a fill layer here by clicking on this add fill layer button. And so this fill layer is actually a material as well. If I check the base color and change that, you can see it changes that property. And it's outputting these other properties as well. If I look at the roughness, I can control this, and you can see that makes it glossy, reflective, or more rough and diffuse. Metallic will turn it metallic. And so there's these other parameters that we're not immediately using. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and disable these so we can just look at the base color and see what kind of control we have by inputting our own images here. So if I click on that attribute, you can see it immediately brings up our resources, which is also going to correlate to what content we have available in our asset panel. If I go over here as well, I can click and see textures, and a lot of these are procedural tiling textures. So I can either click one from here or just drag and drop one from over here, and that is going to apply. And so it's very large. I can go ahead and scale that up if I would like. So this is just a black and white texture, so I have a few ways of affecting its color. It's worth pointing out that I can mix layers by using blending modes. And so you can see here, this output is only outputting the color, and you can see the other material effects coming from the layer below. But I can also even use blend modes that you might be familiar with from Photoshop to do something like a multiply. I can adjust its opacity. And so that's one way of mixing color. If I set this back to normal, I can do something like right click and add a filter and look for a gradient map, which will allow me to remap the color of that image to something specific, giving me a little bit more added control. So there are plenty of options for kind of building up materials through the layer stack. Now, if I want to add new materials, I can obviously browse through my content library, as well as search for other resources such as Substance 3D assets. So if I have an idea of something that I want, in this case, I have a weird idea for some metallic leather, and of course that exists. So I can go ahead and download this asset, which will help me show off the ability to import assets into Painter, which when you do so, I just drag and drop that to the asset panel. And I'm going to, set this as a base material to define it, and whether or not I want to import it for just this session, for the project, or permanently to my library. So I'm just going to use current session in import. And there it is. I can go ahead and drag and drop that there. So this is a procedural material. I can look through a few of the different presets and use which one I would like to use, make some adjustments. Say I'm happy with that. Now for the other materials, I can use another program in the Substance 3D suite, such as Designer, where this fabric has been procedurally authored if you're comfortable working here. Or you can also use Substance 3D Sampler, which is a much more accessible tool, where I've just input an image here and used image to material to create this material very quickly. And these both have these quick export send to painter options. And I'm going to go back to Designer and do that with the substance here by right clicking on it and saying send to Substance 3D Painter. And when I go back there, I can see that showed up in my assets. I can drag and drop, it's ready to go. That looks good. Maybe I will rotate it so it aligns with my strap. And for the rest, I can simply just search out different substances that I want. I have the silicone that I can place here. I'm going to adjust its color. See, use this dark blue that I'm going for. And so there's this piece here on the sole that I want to use that same material. I have an option here where I can copy a layer. I'm going to Control Alt right click to get to that texture set. And what I can do, instead of just pasting it, I can paste it as an instance. And so that means when I go back to the original source and change it, they're both going to be affected. And so I'll continue on and I drag that same material down to the bottom of the sole, but use a different color. I had this idea for using this striped polyester here on the heel and the straps. So I'm just going to adjust the rotation here so it kind of follows the heel. I can copy and paste this onto the other parts of the straps if I want them to continue to use the same parameters. But since I'm going to rotate them, I need to have separate materials that aren't linked. And I can tile this a little bit more. I'll do the same for the other strap. Rotate that to align. And I'm just going to search out some simple rubber for the ends. Okay, so I have my shoe kind of filled in with materials here. So let's jump and take a look at how we can add a decal to the surface using some 2D art from Illustrator in this case. So I'm just going to jump over to Illustrator. And so say if you have some kind of 2D design that you want to put onto the 3D model. In this case, this is a vector art, obviously, but I want to export this into a PNG. It's going to be pretty easy to pass along transparency, which will be useful for when we apply it to the model. So I'm just going to go export for screens, and you can see it's set to PNG right here. And I'll export that artboard. And so what you'll get is something that looks like that. And when it comes to importing images or textures into Painter, you're going to do it the same way as we did the material before, where you drag it into the asset panel. Now you just need to set it where we set base material before. You need to set it to a texture. And I'm just going to put it back to be for my current session again. And then import. And then so it's automatically going to show it over in the texture region of the panel. And if I want to put this onto my shoe, all I got to do is hold Alt on the keyboard, drag it onto the upper, and it's going to ask me what do I want to use this for, the various channels. I'm going to say for this one, I'm going to put this into the base color. So you can see if I click and drag that around the surface, I'm just going to go ahead and turn off that underlying material so I can see this a little bit more clearly. You can see I'm able to drag that across the surface wherever I want to. See, it's getting a little clipped right here on the edge. That is just the projection depth. It's not being projected all the way through the mesh. So you can adjust that over here in the properties to get that to fill through. So I have even more control over how this is placed on the surface, besides just being able to drag. If I look up at the top, I can select between regular transform, rotation, and scale tools, which can also be controlled on the keyboard with W, E, and R. So if I wanted to rotate it with E, I can just grab that familiar manipulator and do that. Same with the translate. You can see if I move it away from the mesh, the projection depth comes into play. And even further, we have control over this transform warp to where we can actually select the vertices of this projection interface and like conform it to the shape of our mesh, which will really give us control over exactly how that's being mapped to the surface. And we can use this in another cool way in a minute. But I want to show another cool feature, which allows you to update content that's been used within your project really easily. So in this case, I have this logo that I applied here. And let's say there's been a change made to the logo, and I want to update it as it's applied to the surface, but without having to go through all the steps that I just did in projecting it. So the way that I can do that is just use the resource updater over here in the tool panel. If I click that, I'm going to see all the assets that have been used in my scene so far, including that logo that we just imported. And what I can do is select a new resource to replace it with. So in this case, I'm just going to scroll through, maybe find the painter icon. Just select that and hit update. And you can see that it replaced it directly in the place where I had it before. So I'm just going to exit out of the vertice mode. If I just go back to the transform warp, and then I'm just going to scale this down. This is a little bit bigger than the previous logo. And this painter icon doesn't have any transparency, which is why I can see the black, but I can just go back to the layer again and set the blend mode to either multiply or add, probably better in this case, and then adjust the opacity, and that'll get what I want. And since we're kind of in here close looking at this upper section, you may have noticed that there's a seam here in the material, which is pretty unsightly. And that has to do with how the UVs were automatically generated. They produced a seam there. But there's a way to get around to that using different projection methods to where this is being just mapped in 2D against the UVs. You can see, if I scale this, you can kind of see where the seam is. So what I can do to get rid of that is I can use something like triplanar is a good one for like stochastic noises. In this case, I'm going to try using a cylinder projection. So if I do that, you can see it's doing some strange effects. Let's see, if I hit Q, then I can actually see this cylinder that is being used and is kind of projecting the material from that cylinder inward onto the upper. And so let's see if I rotate this around, I should be able to control the way that kind of looks. So using those same kind of transform options. And so since it's being projected by that cylinder, it avoids any issues with the seams since it's not relying on the underlying UVs to map the textures of the material. And I actually kind of liked some of those weird effects that I was getting from having this offset from the shoe to where I start getting kind of these crazy patterns. And so kind of playing around with this, I kind of figured we could continue on with this kind of sci-fi like shoe design. So you kind of run into interesting accidents like that still in 3D, which is kind of cool. Okay, so it wouldn't be appropriate to show off Painter without actually showing its painting function. So we can do that. I'm going to still work on this upper in its layer stack. What I can do is just create a new layer with this paintbrush icon. And you see that it just looks like kind of an empty layer like you might see in Photoshop. So with that created, you can select the paintbrush tool And if you go to the brush icon in the libraries, you're going to see a bunch of different brushes. Just select the basic one real quick, and you can immediately paint on the surface. So by default, you're just kind of painting this white color, but you can use actual materials as paint for the paintbrush, so to speak. So if I select this metallic material, I can paint that more clear here. You also have a ton of brush options. So there's stuff like these kind of dynamic paintbrush effects. You even have Photoshop brushes. So stuff that you may use there that you're used to works here as well. So there's also these dynamic stroke brushes, such as the stitching brushes, which are going to be very useful in this context, where if I paint with those, I'm rolling on the stitching for the shoe along with some other material effects to make it look more realistic. So I was drawing this with the mouse so you can see that it was unstable. And so if I undo that, I can turn on lazy mouse, which is going to smooth out that stroke and give me much better results. Okay, so you can see that using a paint layer gives you a ton of direct control over your design. So now let's jump on to another feature in displacement. So displacement is actually going to do as it suggests in displacing the mesh. You can see here that even though some of these effects kind of look like there is, change in the surface of the mesh, when we look at it kind of in profile here from the side, you can see it's not actually really, kind of ribbed as this is looking like from this view. Also, the detail in this kind of metallic leather, it's kind of the same deal. It's kind of a trick, but we do have displacement here. We just need to enable it in our shader settings. So I just click on this option here. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and I see it's checked on, but the scale is set to 0 for me. So I'm just going to set this to 0.01. And then the next thing is the subdivision count. This is how many times the mesh is being subdivided, because it needs a certain amount of resolution to be able to displace the mesh. Usually you can, if you have a powerful enough machine, you can kind of crank this all the way up so you know you have enough resolution to work with. Now, if I go in, I'm going to take a look at this rib material. All right, let's do this one. So I can see it's still not displacing, but I just need to enable the height map. So if I check that, I can see, now I'm going to see that surface detail, and I can see it's even to the detail of the thread. So all I got to do is go into my other materials and enable the height map. I can see on my strap, the effect is a little bit too pronounced. So if I go into the technical parameters on this one, there's always going to be these options down at the bottom. That is going to allow me to control that, so I can reduce the height range here, get something more realistic. So that shows me how I can utilize the displacement effects that are coming from a given material. But we can now take a look at how I can use displacement kind of directly if I want to create some other effects on the mesh. Like in the case of the sole, if I wanted to create a tread pattern that I did not model in, but I can actually use displacement to do that after the fact here in Painter. So I wanted to take a look at an option that allows us to do this kind of non-destructively and shows off the warp tool a little bit more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the texture tab where I have a lot of these kind of tiling patterns that I'm just going to use one to kind of quickly create a tread pattern. And so what I'm doing, holding Alt again, like before, like we're applying a decal, and I'm going to let go. And remember how I asked whether or not we would put that in these different channels where I used the base color last time. This time I'm going to use it as a mask. And what that does, it applies that texture into a layer mask, just like in Photoshop. So I can even alt click on that and see that I have that mask there. So what I'm going to do with that, and this is kind of a nice non-destructive way of working, we see I have this layered material, and I'm just going to change the color real quick to see that effect. So that mask is revealing that material. But I don't actually want to use any color. I only want to use displacement. So what I can do is just disable all the other channels other than height. And then I can adjust that height parameter to displace the mesh. So this is only filling up this small part of the shoe. So what I'm going to do, just click on the layer mask again, click on my effect that's applied to it, and then I get back to my decal mode. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go into my scale mode, and I'm going to, from the center, scale up this whole texture to fill the whole bottom of the sole. Now I want to tile that pattern, and instead of using the UV transforms, I'm actually going to just use that in its own attributes. So I can tile that a few times. And I can see it's going all the way through the sole, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. If I wanted to reduce the area that it affects, I can either move the projection plane away from the shoe or also control that projection depth. And so let's say if I pull it back to where it's only kind of affecting the bottom of the shoe, but then we see, remember, it's clipping here. And so what I can do in that case is try to conform this projection plane to the surface of that sole. So I can go back here under transform warp and say edit vertices, and I can select those vertices, and that's going to allow me to move this projection plane and kind of deform it to conform to the bottom of the shoe. And I can even rotate that if I wanted to. And it can get more granular if you, in that same option, you have these options to split this. So I can do that. That just gives me more vertices to work with. So I can pull that. I can do it here as well if I wanted to. Let's see. So there we go. I can just hit Q to get out of there. So it's really nice using it as a mask. So if I alt click in there again, you can see what I've done. Kind of conform that layer mask to the bottom of the sole. And so that, again, that's controlling just this kind of layer that's only outputting height. And so when I adjust that height channel, I'm actually displacing the mesh. Okay, the final thing I want to touch upon are smart materials and the cool localized effects that you can get by using those. And to use them, you need some information about this object, the shoe, and we can get that and store that in texture maps. And we can generate those here in the texture set settings, which are next to my layers in this case. So if I go there and scroll down, I'm going to see this option of bake mesh maps. I'm going to go click in there, and I'm going to pick some resolution. I'll do 2K, the same as my document in this case. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to check this use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. And so it's basically just going to use itself to bake this information. And then the smart materials will use that information to generate those effects that I mentioned. So I'm going to click that, hit bake selected textures. And this may take a few minutes as it goes through and bakes all those mesh maps. Okay, that took about a minute or so. And so I'm just going to hit OK. Back to my layers. And if I go back to the assets, that first section is just plain materials. The one just to the right of that are smart materials. So to see their effects, I'm just going to go ahead and pick something dramatic down here, like this machinery material. And I'm just going to drag that onto the upper. And you can see what it's doing since it knows a little bit more about the object now. It's able to put effects like this rust accumulating in these kind of occluded areas, and it knows where the edges of the object is. So if it wanted to create wear there, etc., it works automatically. And what a smart material really is a folder built up of materials that have various filters or generators applied to layer masks in this case to create those effects. And once you've built that, you can actually save this as a smart material by just right clicking on it and create smart material. So we can create kind of a more practical example. I'm just going to turn off that underlying material and just clean some of these up real quick. So what I'll do is just create a fill layer and just give it some kind of contrasting color. I'm going to create another one. I'll make this one just blue. And then so I have this blue over red just to kind of show this how this works. And I'm going to create a black mask. And with that mask selected, I'm going to say add generator. And then so I see under the properties, there's the generator option. So I'm just going to say gradient. And so in this case, this is a 3D linear gradient. And so what we get is this kind of volumetric gradient effect. Since it has the extra information that we baked with the mesh maps, it just kind of works. And so what I can do is just create a group out of those two. And let me just name this 3D gradient. Right click on that, create a smart material. There it is. I can select that and drag that here. And it works automatically. I would just come here and adjust where that balance is. If I want to adjust where that position is, you can see, increase the contrast, exactly what's happening. So cool. All right, so I'm just gonna delete those effects and go back to my material layout that I had. Now, one of the last things I want to show is the ability to quickly send your models to Stager for rendering and layout. You can do rendering right here in Painter if you click this icon up at the top right of the viewer, but Stager is going to give you more control if you want to kind of add stuff to the scene and control the lighting. So the way I can do that is over here in the tool palette, there's this kind of export looking icon and it says send to Substance 3D Stager. If I click that, it's automatically going to kind of compile the scene, send it over to Stager. And so it'll just kind of pop up ready to go. Navigating in Stager is just the same as Painter. You can even hold shift to control the lighting. And you see this is a real-time viewport by default, just the same, but up here at the top left, there's a ray tracing option and it has a GPU renderer. And so once I get that going, you can see I'm getting a higher quality visual of the shoe. Also by default, currently the displacement isn't turned on. I just need to go and make sure I increase the subdivision of my meshes. If I just select them and increase that, I should start to see my displacement effects. And I can create a camera, do all kinds of other stuff with depth of field, and create nice renders here. I can create multiple cameras that I can jump between for different views. And there's even this cool feature that allows you to export this to the web. So once that's published, I can go ahead and copy the link or click on this, and it's going to open up. So it brings up this 3D viewer that you can use to share around and look at the design in full 3D, and also stores the camera angles that you had created. And people can leave comments and whatnot. So it's a nice feature coming from Stager as well. Okay, hopefully this gave you a general idea of some of the features available to you through Adobe Substance 3D Painter and the Substance 3D Suite. There's still a ton more and a ton more to come, so stay tuned. Thanks. All right, that was it for the demo. Any questions that I can answer? I also have my machine here if you guys want to see any one-off demos of anything I can show you there.
Thanks, Justin. That was great. Everyone is just saying a lot of great stuff about this. Some people didn't know about Substance. Some people didn't know that they could use their gravity sketches with Substance, and that's a powerful combo. I'm looking for some questions. It's just like really nice things. Anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, please post them here. Thanks. Is this web viewer window embeddable somehow or just inside the stager?
It's I don't believe it's embeddable yet, but it's available just through any browser though. So it's like a link that you can share to anyone that even works on your phone. But if you wanted to embed it within a site, that's not currently available.
Okay. Okay, thanks, she says. This new wrap projection tool is looking awesome. Very nice. Quick question. In the workflow between Gravity Sketch and Substance Painter, do we need to use some third-party tool for unwrapping UVs?
So Painter has automatic UV unwrapping, and I covered that very quick in the beginning. Let's see if I can just show that real quick again. So if I just select the shoe, when you're creating a new file, there's this option right here down on import settings that says auto unwrap. So you need to check that and make sure in the options that you're setting it to recompute, because that's just going to force it to regenerate all the UVs. So if you have UVs that are there, but they're incorrect, you want to basically do this so it compiles them into a single tile, and it's going to work okay here. So that's all you need, and then you'll do that, and then it's pretty quick and you're good to go.
Cool. Any more questions from the audience? We have Justin here to explain everything to you. Can this Substance Painter work in VR with the Gravity Sketch application, or do I have to export it to my desktop?
Yeah, currently you definitely have to export it out to a separate model and import it kind of in the workflow that I just showed. So yeah, that would be awesome though.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I joined late. Was the model entirely created in Gravity Sketch before bringing it into Substance? Yes.
Yeah, so this shoe model was originally created by another artist named Damien Clement. And to learn kind of Gravity Sketch myself, I went in there and did some modifications to it using the sub-D features. So yes, in that case, it was definitely created fully in Gravity Sketch.
Awesome. Okay, I think we are. Oh no, they keep going. Is there a plan for Substance Painter to implement non-destructive Bezier-based strokes?
I haven't heard a plan for that myself. I suppose it's possible though, considering that the engine, the underlying stroke engine and everything is storing your stroke set as it is. So I would imagine that it would be possible.
Good. All right. Well, I mean, just in the, every time I'm going to like close it. Maybe you're already explained this, but do you see this replacing Keyshot? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, Keyshot has a lot of comparable features, I think, to at least Stager, in terms of like being one kind of tool where you kind of put stuff together in a scene. Our system is a little bit broken out and goes much further into detail in terms of like being able to texture here in Painter, the authoring of materials in Substance Designer or Sampler, and then Stager kind of taking on that kind of staging and composition aspect. So we're definitely in competition with Keyshot for sure. So, and then in that sense, I don't have a ton of experience in Keyshot to know exactly how we compare, but I know we do have a lot of similar features. So
Is there any tool for customized and precise wrapping texture? Okay, yeah, we covered it just now.
Yeah. There's the projection modes, and it depends on exactly what you wanted to do, because I showed the projection options here, and painting in general is kind of a customized way of wrapping textures and stuff like that. So
cool. All right. Yeah, well, any more questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Well, I mean, Justin, it has been great to have you around and to see this really great tutorial. I mean, a lot of the comments in the chat were saying that they were waiting for this tutorial to happen. So I'm glad it has happened now, and it will sure be available on YouTube. So yeah, keep an eye for that.
awesome. That's great to hear. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, and thank you, everyone. We will come back in a few minutes with our next talk with Peter Jarretts from Volkswagen. Thank you.